My name is Claire Doran. I'm 37 now, but I remember exactly how the hallway light used to flicker in our old house on Wilcox Street. It wasn't like the kind of flicker you get from a loose bulb. This one pulsed almost rhythmic, like a warning. It always happened right before something bad. Sometimes that meant voices raised behind closed doors. Sometimes it was the sound of the bathroom door slamming so hard the picture frame fell off the wall. Sometimes it meant silence, the worst kind, the one that stretched too long and made the air in the house taste like cold metal. I was 7 when I heard it the first time. Not the light, the sentence. Mom was on the phone with someone. Her voice was low-clipped. I don't think she meant me to hear. But I was sitting in the hallway tracing the edge of the carpet with my finger like I always did when she got like that. "He's gone," she said. And she's just like him. Weak, pathetic. A failure in the making. There wasn't a sound after that. Just the hum of the fridge and the way my stomach started to hurt like it did whenever she forgot to feed me. I remember staring at the doorframe, counting the little cracks in the paint, thinking, I'm not weak. I didn't do anything. But the words stayed. Not shouted, not screamed, just dropped into the quiet like a stone in a still pond. I don't remember my father. That was by design. My mother never said his name, never kept pictures. It was like someone had scrubbed him out of our lives with steel wool. When I asked once, maybe I was 5, she looked at me like I'd betrayed her. "You don't get to ask about him," she'd said. "He doesn't matter. He left. You want to end up like him?" She used to say that, with her eyes half-lidded, her mouth tight, like she was chewing on nails. I didn't ask again. She had this thing about control. Everything had to be straight lines, polished shoes, dishes done by 6. The silence in our house wasn't peace, it was a muzzle. The hallway became my place. It was narrow and dusty and lit with that flickering bulb. But it was mine. I'd sit there and trace the same line in the carpet. Back and forth, back and forth. A little groove wore down in it over the years. I don't think she ever noticed. We lived in the kind of neighborhood where nobody knocked. You had to be dying or delivering a package. Everyone kept to themselves, and that suited her fine. Some days, I pretended the light flicker meant something else. A signal. Like maybe he was still out there. My father. Maybe he'd see the light blinking and remember. Maybe he'd come back. Stupid, I know. By the time I turned 10, I knew not to hope for things like that. The only photo I ever found of him was a scrap half a picture wedged behind the bathroom mirror. I only saw his arm and part of his jaw. That was it. I kept it for a while in a shoebox under my bed. Then one day, it was gone. She never said anything, but I knew. That was how she operated. No explanations, just absence. The worst was the birthday dinners. Every year, she'd light one candle on a cupcake. No singing, no wrapping paper. Just her across the table asking another year. What are you going to do with it? As if every breath I took was a debt I owed her. At school, I kept quiet. People said I was well-behaved, polite. But really, I just didn't know how to take up space. I didn't know how to talk without flinching. The teachers liked me. They'd say, "You're so mature for your age." But what they meant was, "You've learned how to disappear when it's safest." Once I remember hearing a friend's mom call her baby, just like that out loud in a parking lot, and the girl didn't flinch. She smiled. That hit me harder than anything. I never heard Jeannie, my mother, say that word to me. Not once. Funny the things that stay with you. She worked nights sometimes, and on those nights I'd open the hallway closet and sit inside. There was a blanket and an old pair of boots that smelled like dust and vinegar. It was the only place in the house that felt like it didn't belong to her. I'd sit in the dark with the door cracked, watching that hallway light flicker. I used to pretend it was Morse code, a message from someone I hadn't met yet. Someone who might tell me I wasn't just a shadow of a man I never knew. Because even back then, I could feel it how much she wanted me to believe I was doomed from the start. "You're just like him," she'd say, and even when she didn't, I heard it in the way she looked at me when I spilled something, or when I got a B instead of an A, or when I cried after she slammed the car door so loud it made the dog next door bark. He was the ghost she punished me for, and I didn't know if he deserved it, or if I did. But I knew one thing, that flickering light, that tiny stuttering bulb, it saw everything. And it never said a word. There was a drawer in my mother's bedroom that didn't fit the house. Everything else was beige, tidy, scentless. The bathroom smelled like bleach. The living room had plastic on the furniture until I was 12. But that drawer top right of her dresser had a tarnished handle and a slight lean like it belonged somewhere else. Somewhere warmer. Maybe a cabin. Maybe a real home. It was locked always. I don't remember ever seeing it open. Even when I was little, that made it important. She kept the key on a chain she wore around her neck, thin, silver, almost nothing. I noticed it one morning when I was maybe 9. I asked about it, pretending curiosity. Her eyes narrowed. "You don't ask about what doesn't belong to you." It was the tone that shut me up, not the words. That quiet, razor-thin kind of cold that didn't shout, but still cut skin. I became obsessed with that drawer. I'd stare at it when she left the door cracked. Some days, when I was alone in the house, I'd stand in front of it and just look. Try to imagine the weight inside. Photos. Letters. A gun. By 15, I knew better than to ask. But I'd also learned how to move quietly. One Saturday afternoon, she left for a church function. The kind where she wore navy slacks and lipstick that didn't quite match her mouth. She wouldn't be home for hours. I went into her room. It still smelled like powder, and something sharp underneath, maybe old soap, maybe something worse. I tried the drawer just in case. Still locked. I got a hairpin from my room. I'd watched a video once on a friend's phone about how locks worked. Not enough to do it right, but I was desperate. The pin bent on the second try. I tried a safety pin next, then a paperclip. The lock made a clicking sound, and for a second, I thought I'd done it. But nothing moved. I was still bent over, breathing hard when the front door slammed. Too early. I barely had time to shut her bedroom door and run back down the hall before I heard her heels on the wood. I was sitting in the kitchen, pretending to read, when she walked in. She stopped. I looked up. Her eyes slid over me, then past me. I knew what she was doing, listening for the sound of something out of place. Then she walked to her room. She didn't call my name. That would have been too easy. I heard the drawer open, then close. Then the hallway creaked as she walked back toward the kitchen. I didn't breathe. She stood in the doorway and looked at me, really looked. Her face was blank, like a wall. Then she said it. "Do you think you're smart?" I shook my head, confused. "No, what?" She stepped closer. "You think you're clever? Like him." I blinked. "You think I didn't see it?" The way you sneak around, her voice was low now, almost a whisper. "You're just like your father. A failure. Too dumb to see it." She slapped me. Not hard enough to bruise, just hard enough to sting. The kind of hit that wasn't about hurting, it was about claiming something. Territory. Control. I stood there frozen. My cheeks burned, but not from the slap. It was the word she used. Failure. Like it was carved into my birth certificate. She walked away after that. No apology, no explanation. Later, when she was in the shower, I crept back in. The drawer was locked again. But the one thing she hadn't done was clean the top of it. There, stuck to the edge of a photograph, was a sliver of envelope. I could barely make it out, but it was addressed to someone. Derek Doran. I traced the letters with my finger. That was the first time I saw his name. She never told me. Not once. In all those years. But there it was in her drawer, under lock and silence. I didn't say anything. Not to her. Not for years. But I never forgot the name. It settled into my brain like a pebble, in a shoe, small, sharp, impossible to ignore. I went back to that drawer hundreds of times in my head. I imagined it opening. Imagined the pages inside curled from time or tears. What would they have said that he loved me, that he tried, that she kept him away? I didn't know what kind of man he was. But that day, that slap, that name, I realized something my mother hadn't erased him. She'd buried him. And whatever was locked in that drawer was the shovel. The first time I put on the uniform, I felt taller. It wasn't pride, not exactly. More like distance. Like I'd finally stepped out of the hallway, out of the house, out of her voice. I enlisted at 17. Early, quietly. I used my middle name when I filled out the paperwork, Claire Elise Doran. It felt like wearing a coat inside out, like hiding in plain sight. She didn't know until I brought home the enlistment packet already signed. She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, coffee going cold beside her. I handed her the papers like a peace offering. She didn't even glance at them. "You think this makes you someone?" she asked. "No," I said. "I just don't want to be no one." She stared at me for a long time, then nodded once like she'd been waiting for that exact sentence so she could file it in the drawer in her head labeled just like him. "You'll regret this," she said. He wore a uniform too. It was the first direct thing she ever said about him. I don't think she even realized. Her voice didn't change. Her eyes didn't blink. That night, I sat on my bed and repeated the words out loud. He wore a uniform too. I wanted to ask what kind, when, where. But I didn't, because I knew what she'd say. He doesn't matter. He always mattered. Basic was a kind of freedom I didn't expect. Waking up in bunk beds, shouting, sweat, blisters. People yelling my name and meaning it. And for the first time, silence wasn't a punishment. It was earned, respected. They called me dependable, disciplined, the kind of soldier who didn't flinch. I thought about telling her that in letters, but I never wrote. At graduation, she showed up anyway, wearing a dark gray coat and the same lipstick from every funeral and ceremony she ever tolerated. She stood in the back, didn't clap, didn't smile. When they handed me my pin, I scanned the crowd, my peers hugging their parents, crying, shouting. My mother was still. After the ceremony, I found her leaning against a wall near the parking lot, arms crossed again. "No flowers? No camera?" "Well," she said, "you made it through play, pretend." I said nothing. She took a step forward, looked at the uniform. Her mouth twitched. "You think you're something now? I think I'm not stuck anymore." She smiled. Not a real one. One of those half-curled sideways expressions she used when she wanted to make something sting harder. Then she said it. "You're just like your father. A failure in uniform. Not welcome home. Not, 'I'm proud of you.' Just that." I didn't flinch. But something shifted, like a pane of glass inside me cracked. Quiet but permanent. She walked away before I could speak, and part of me was glad. Because what would I have said that I didn't care? That would have been a lie. I stood there in the lot for a while, sweating under the wool of the dress blues. People passed me laughing, crying, dragging duffel bags to cars. I didn't move. She hadn't said his name, but she'd tied me to him again, Same chain. Same key. For a long time, I believed her. Believed that failure was genetic. That shame was bone deep. Something passed down like eye color. But standing there with the weight of my name stitched onto my chest, I realized something. Something quiet. I didn't know him, and she didn't know me. She'd decided who I was before I could even speak in full sentences. She made me into his ghost so she'd never have to look at her own reflection. I wasn't the one failing. I was the one walking away. When I got back to base, I sat on my bunk and opened the footlocker. Inside was the pin they'd given me still warm from my palm. I placed it next to a blank notebook I'd been carrying since basic. One I hadn't dared write in. I picked up the pen and wrote one name across the first page, Derek Doran. Not mine, not anymore. But I had questions. And the next time the hallway light flickered in my dreams, I saw it for what it really was. Not a warning, an invitation. I didn't plan on sending in the kit. It came in a packet tucked between my health records and a free voucher for energy drinks. A casual bonus? Know your roots, the pamphlet said, like history could be poured into a plastic tube and mailed off with a barcode. But it stayed on my desk for weeks. The little box sat there quiet, waiting. I don't know what finally made me open it. Maybe boredom. Maybe curiosity. Maybe that flicker inside me, that same one that used to watch the hallway light. It was a rainy day. I'd been transferred back stateside in that soft lull between assignments. Nothing to do but drink burnt coffee and answer emails. I filled the vial, sealed the bag, dropped it off with the mail clerk who didn't ask any questions. And then I forgot about it, or tried to. 3 weeks later, I got an email. Your results are ready. I clicked the link, logged in. The first page was simple, a list of regions, percentages, ancestral breakdown. Nothing shocking. Northern Europe, a few scattered lines of southern U.S. migration. The usual melting pot. Then I clicked the next tab. Family matches. There was no one listed as parent, not even a potential. And under close family, nothing matched the name Doran. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I refreshed the page, checked the filters, tried again. Nothing. I scrolled through second cousins, third cousins' names. I'd never heard of people whose faces meant nothing. But no Derek Doran, no father match. It didn't make sense. He was my father. That's what she told me. That's what the birth certificate said. But according to the code printed on this screen, he wasn't. I called the company, asked if there could have been a mistake. The woman on the line spoke gently, like she'd had this conversation before. No, she said. The markers are accurate. If the person listed as your father isn't showing he's not biologically related. Not unless he also changed his name. I hung up before she could finish the sentence. Then I sat there in silence. Not the kind I grew up with, not her silence. This one was deeper. Not sharp, just still, like standing in a canyon with nothing left to echo. For 37 years I believed I was one thing. A daughter. Of a man named Derek Doran. A failure's shadow. Her words had shaped me like hands pressing into wet clay. Every time she called me weak or dumb, or like him, it fused into my spine. And now, according to this printout, it was a lie. He wasn't my father. Or if he was, it was only on paper. Not in blood, not in cells. I stared at the screen so long it blurred. Then I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the notebook, the one I started after graduation. I flipped to the page with his name, crossed it out. I didn't write anything else. I just looked at the blank page, letting the absence speak. Later that night, I pulled out the old photo, the scrap from behind the mirror, the one I'd kept hidden until I was 12, and then folded into a sock for safekeeping. His jaw. His arm. That's all I had. Was it even him? I held it under the desk lamp, stared at it, until it felt like looking into smoke. She lied. Not just about him, about me. I tried to remember every time she said it. You're just like him. Now the sentence sounded hollow, performed, like she'd been saying it to someone else entirely. Who was she punishing? Not him. Not me. Maybe herself. I couldn't ask her not yet, not without proof, not without something solid to hold in my hand. So I ordered another kit, from a different company, sent it off, waited. This time the match was instant. One close relative, Mitchell Wynn, age 74, retired Marine, Georgia, listed as parent, likely father. I stared at the name. Wynn, not Doran, a whole different lineage, a whole different man. I said the name out loud just once, Mitchell Wynn. It didn't feel familiar, but it didn't feel wrong. It felt open. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. I just sat back in the chair and listened to the hum of the light overhead. It didn't flicker, not once. I drove to Georgia in silence, no music, no radio, just the sound of tires carving lines into asphalt and the low growl of the engine when I pressed too hard. I stopped twice for gas, and once to sit in a Waffle House parking lot with my fingers curled around the steering wheel too tight. The address had come through the Match Profile public records, tied to a landline still listed under Mitchell Wynn. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He lived outside a town called Hazelwood, one of those places with a single blinking traffic light and a hardware store that still closed at noon on Sundays. His house was a squat ranch style with cracked siding and a flag that had faded in the sun. There was a dog barking behind the fence, sharp and fast, the kind that didn't trust strangers. I sat in the car for almost 10 minutes before I got out. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. When I knocked, it wasn't a dramatic moment. No slow opening door, no gasp of recognition. It opened halfway. A man stood there. White hair, long arms, Marine Corps ball cap pulled low. He blinked once, stared, then stepped out onto the porch. "Can I help you?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out at first. "Then my name's Claire." His eyes changed just a flicker, like recognition sneaking in through the back door. "Claire," he repeated, not a question. I nodded. "Claire Doran. You're listed as my match." I paused. Biological match. He leaned back a little like the porch suddenly wasn't steady beneath him. He looked at me longer then. Really looked. Not just my face, but the way I stood, my jaw, my hands. "You got her eyes," he said. "But that mouth, that's mine." His voice cracked halfway through. He laughed once, but it was thin, more breath than sound. "Guess I always wondered," he said. "You want to come in?" I nodded, followed him into a house that smelled like tobacco and sawdust. The living room was full of books and forgotten coffee mugs. The carpet was worn where feet had paced the same circle for years. He sat on a recliner and motioned for me to take the other chair. I didn't know where to start. Luckily he did. "Your mother," he said slowly, "was the smartest woman I ever knew, and the meanest." That stopped me. He smiled again, crooked this time. "Don't mean that cruel. Just true." They'd met in the service, on base in Norfolk. He was older. She was a logistics coordinator, strict, brilliant, sharp as hell. She could spot a typo from 20 feet and make a grown man feel like he'd pissed himself, he said. "She never mentioned any of that. She never told me she was pregnant," he continued. "She just left. Disappeared one day. I thought maybe she'd had enough of me. Maybe she got scared." His fingers tapped against the armrest. "I wrote," he said. "For years. Got nothing back." I thought of the drawer. The letters inside. "She kept them," I said quietly. He looked up. "She did, locked in a drawer she never opened." He let out a long breath. It sounded like defeat, or maybe relief. "Why'd she lie?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. Pride, maybe. Or maybe she couldn't stand the idea that someone else got to leave first." There was no anger in his voice, just weight. "She told me my father's name was Derek Doran," I said. He blinked. "That's not anyone I know. I think she made him up." He didn't respond right away. Just looked at me the way someone watches a storm in the distance, knowing it's already passed, but still feeling the rain in their bones. "Do you have any photos?" I asked. He stood up, left the room. When he came back, he was holding a freezer bag. Inside was a broken locket. And a photo. It was old, creased in half. In the photo, Jeannie was smiling. I stared at it. I didn't know she could smile like that. She was holding a baby. Me. "You were 6 months," he said. "She sent me that once. Then nothing." I took the bag in my hands. The locket was cheap gold-colored, snapped at the hinge. The photo had my name written in ink on the back. "Claire Elise. 6 months. Don't send anything back." He watched me read it. "I kept it anyway," he said. "Didn't know if I ever would see you." I didn't cry, but my throat closed up around something heavy. "She told me I was just like him," I whispered. "My whole life." His face softened. She was wrong. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat. The dog barked once outside and quieted. A clock ticked somewhere behind us. When I left, he didn't hug me. Didn't ask for anything. Just nodded and said, "I'm glad you came." And for once, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in my own story. I drove back with the photo in my glove box, the locket in my hand. Something had cracked open. Not a wound. A window. I held the locket the whole drive back. Didn't wear it. Just kept it in my palm, fingers curled around the cracked metal, like it was a pressure point that might explain something if I pressed hard enough. It had weight. Not a lot, but enough to remind me it was real. The hinge was busted split open along the side. I tried to close it, but it never stayed. Mitchell had kept it in a freezer bag, the kind you use for chicken or leftover pasta. A strange kind of reverence, but it made sense to me. We both learned to keep fragile things sealed. When I got home, I took it out and laid it on the desk beside the photo. She looked young in it. Jeannie. Almost soft. Her smile in that image wasn't the one I grew up with. It didn't have that tightness, that tension that made you feel like she was holding back 1,000 things. She looked open. Tired, maybe, but open. Her arm was wrapped around me a little too tight, like she wasn't sure if someone might try to take me away. It made my stomach twist, because I had no memory of that woman. I sat there staring at her face, that version of her, and felt the edges of something I couldn't name. Regret, maybe. Not mine. Hers. I left the locket open on the table. It was gold-colored, with a jagged hinge that squeaked when I touched it. On one side, the photo of me as a baby. On the other, empty. Maybe the other half of her face was once there, or his. Now it was just void. I stared at it until the room started to dim. The sun was falling outside, dragging shadows over everything, and I kept thinking, how did she choose to carry this with her, to keep it all these years and still lie to my face over and over? Was that guilt? Was that love? Or was it just habit? I didn't know which question hurt more. I slept poorly that night. My dreams were twitchy, scattered. Bits of half-memory, her standing in the hallway, the flickering bulb above her head holding something in her hand that I couldn't see. My name echoing like it didn't belong to me. I woke up at 4 a.m, sweating. Went back to the desk. Still there. The locket. The photo? Proof of a different life I was never allowed to know. I picked it up and put it around my neck. It didn't feel sentimental. It felt like armor. The chain was too short. It pressed against my skin. But I left it there anyway. I thought about Mitchell. He didn't cry, didn't beg for a relationship. He looked at me like a man trying not to startle a deer. Careful, honest, tired. He said, "You got her eyes," and it didn't sound like a line. It sounded like error in message stream. Retry. It sounded like someone who had been waiting years to say something simple. Not to heal anything. Not to make up for lost time. Just to name what had been unnamed. I wore the locket under my uniform the next day. Tucked it inside the collar so no one would see it. But I felt it, a cold edge brushing against my chest each time I moved. And every time it shifted, it reminded me she kept this. She chose to keep this. So many things she threw away: my drawings, old birthday cards, even a medal I won for marksmanship in high school that she said wasn't real. She called those things clutter, said they had no place in her house. But this locket stayed. Through 4 moves, a basement flood, and a decade of barely tolerating the sound of my name, this stayed. I couldn't reconcile it. I didn't want to. So instead, I drove back to the old house, Wilcox Street. She was still there, still in the same gray one-story that smelled like disinfectant and stewed air. I hadn't told her about the test, about Mitchell, about the locket. Not yet. When I walked in, the hallway light was still flickering. She never replaced it. I don't know if she didn't notice or if she liked it that way. The bulb buzzed once, then dimmed again. That same rhythm I'd memorized as a child. It was like stepping back into a photograph I never liked. She was sitting at the table peeling the label off a jar of pickles. The television was on low, some court show she always half-watched. She looked up, didn't smile, didn't scowl. "You're early," she said. I hadn't told her I was coming at all. I sat across from her, didn't take my jacket off. The silence stretched just like it used to. She didn't ask why I was there. I didn't offer. Then slowly, I pulled the locket out from under my collar and set it down on the table between us. She stared at it. Her hands froze mid-peel. I said nothing. The silence filled the room like water, heavy, full. She reached forward not quickly and turned it open. Looked at the photo. For a long time, she didn't move. "Then where'd you get that?" Her voice was flat, a little hoarse. I answered calmly, "From him." She didn't blink. Her fingers curled into her palm like claws retracting. "I took a test," I added. It came back conclusive. She didn't respond. "I found him. Still nothing. His name is Mitchell Wynne." At that she flinched barely, but it was there. A ripple behind the eyes. A soft pull at the corner of her mouth. She looked at me, really looked for the first time in what felt like years. "You think that means something?" I kept my voice low. "Even. It means everything you told me was a lie." She exhaled through her nose, picked up the locket, closed it, set it down. I did what I had to do, to protect me. "No," she said sharply. "To protect myself." I stared at her. "I didn't want to be seen as weak," she said. "And being with him, loving him, made me weak. It wasn't a confession. It was an admission. Cold, measured." I waited, but that was it. No apology, no tears, no regret. Just silence again. She stood, walked to the sink, ran the water. Over the noise, she said, "You can keep it. I don't need it anymore." I didn't respond. I didn't need her to need it. I picked up the locket, slipped it back inside my collar, stood. She didn't turn around when I left. The hallway light flickered once, then went out. The next time I visited, it was raining. Not a storm, just the slow kind, the type that soaks everything in silence. I parked a block away even though her driveway was clear. I wasn't avoiding her, just easing into the gravity of it. The house looked smaller, not just from distance. It had contracted somehow, like time had pressed it in from the sides. Or maybe I had just expanded quietly without noticing. I knocked once, then let myself in. The door creaked same as always. She didn't call out. Didn't move from her spot at the kitchen table. Her tea steamed beside her untouched. I stood in the doorway, letting the drip of my coat tap against the hardwood. She glanced at me. "Leave your shoes," she said. That was the closest thing to welcome I'd get. I sat. The table still had the same groove where I'd once carved a line with a fork. She'd hit me for that. Not hard, just enough to make me remember. The scar in the wood outlasted the one on my hand. We didn't talk for a while. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the glass, as if it too was waiting to be let in. I watched her face. Lines deeper now, skin thinner, but her eyes, those hadn't changed. They were still the same steel-colored eyes I used to dread in doorways. They didn't soften. I reached into my coat, pulled out the envelope. Her name was written in my handwriting. Sharp, clean. She didn't touch it. "What is it?" she asked. "Copies of the test results," I said. "And a photo of him?" Still, she didn't move. I thought maybe if you saw his face again, it might feel like less of a ghost story. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's what you think this is?" "A ghost story?" "No," I said. "I think it's an autopsy that got her." She looked at me just for a second, and I saw something break behind her expression. Not shatter, just shift. She finally reached out, slid the envelope toward her, but didn't open it. "You think this changes anything?" she said. I didn't answer right away. She tapped the envelope twice, then stared out the window. "He didn't leave me," she said suddenly. "That's what I told people, that he left, but he didn't. I said nothing. I left him, without warning, without a word. I packed my things while he was in the shower and never looked back. I waited. I loved him," she said, "but I hated the way he made me feel. Seen, soft, open." Her lips pressed tight. That kind of love turns into fear. Fear of what she looked down, being nothing when it ends. Silence again. I looked at her hands. They trembled slightly. "Not from age, from memory?" "You weren't nothing," I said. "You were never supposed to be born," she said quietly. "Not after I left." My throat tightened, but I didn't speak. "I saw the test results. I would have known they'd be accurate." She continued almost to herself. "That's the thing about blood. It doesn't lie." I nodded. "And neither do photographs." She looked up again. Her eyes were glassy, not from tears, but from restraint. "You came here to rub it in?" she asked. "No," I said. "I came here to see what silence looks like when it gets old." She flinched. I stood. "You buried him to protect yourself? Fine, but don't pretend you did it for me." She didn't answer. I walked down the hallway toward the front door. That familiar hallway, the one I used to crawl down on days when my legs were too bruised to walk from practice. The same hallway where I learned how to listen through walls. The light above me flickered once. I stopped, looked up. Still the same bulb, same socket, the same nervous little pulse of electricity. I reached up and tapped it with my finger. It went out. The hallway fell into soft darkness. I walked out and left the door open just long enough to hear her call after me. "Claire." I turned. She didn't look up from the envelope. "I don't know how to say sorry," she said. I waited. She didn't try again. I shut the door gently. That night, I sat on my bed and took the locket off for the first time in weeks. I placed it next to the photo on my nightstand. Then I turned off the light. And for the first time in a long time, nothing flickered. I waited 3 weeks before I went back. Not because I needed space was something I had learned to breathe like oxygen. It was because I didn't want to go back as her daughter. I wanted to go back as myself, whoever that was now. The lock on her bedroom door had never changed. Still the brass one with a rattle in the knob. She didn't know I had copied the key years ago. I'd made it from a mold of wax used a file in the tool shed while she was at church. Back then, I'd been too scared to use it, too scared of what I might find or of what I wouldn't. But now, I wanted the truth in paper form. Ink, edges, things I could hold up to the light and say I wasn't imagining this. She was in the living room watching something with the volume low, always low, like sound itself might betray her. I said I needed to grab something from the back room. She didn't respond. I slipped into the bedroom and closed the door softly. The drawer opened on the first try. Inside it wasn't neat. That surprised me. I expected her secrets to be filed like taxes labeled sterile. But they were jumbled photos, folded paper frayed ribbon, a baby bracelet with my name. I sat down on the edge of her bed and began unfolding what she'd buried. The letters came first. Dozens, maybe more. All from Mitchell. Each one dated. Some opened, some still sealed. His handwriting was dense tight, like he was trying to fit his whole heart into each square inch. Jeannie, I don't know why you left. I just know I'm still here. I miss her. I dream about her. Her name is Claire, right? You called her that once. They got less hopeful over time, more spaced out, shorter. I hope she's happy. I'm still in Georgia, still wondering. I set them down carefully. My hands were shaking. Then the photos. Some of me as a baby, sitting on a blanket, crying, laughing. That one where she held me outside a hospital, she looked different. Her hair unbrushed. Her smile real. And then buried deep at the bottom, a half-burned sheet of paper. I knew what it was before I unfolded it. The bottom half of a birth certificate. Mine. Her name clean and whole. The line for father's name scorched. The burn had crawled up the paper like it was hungry for just that line. She'd tried to erase him with fire. Not just from the world, from me. I turned it over. There was blood on the corner, a small, dried dot. Was it hers, mine? I didn't know what that did to me exactly, only that I couldn't stop staring at it. I folded it again and placed it beside the bracelet. I heard her voice behind me. You always were good with keys. I turned slowly. She was standing in the doorway, her face unreadable, her hands empty. You kept it all, I said. She nodded once. Not denial, not confirmation, just acknowledgement. You kept it, and you lied. She stepped into the room, her feet soundless on the carpet. Some things you keep because you can't forget. Some things you lie about because you can't forgive. For him, for me. I looked down at the drawer. So why burn this? She didn't answer. Did you hate him? I asked. No. Did you love him? She sat on the bed a few inches from the drawer. Not close to me, never close. I loved him the way a knife loves a wound, she said. Needed, dangerous. Something I didn't want to carry, but couldn't drop. I didn't expect that. She reached in and pulled out one of the sealed letters, turned it over in her hand like it was a prayer bead. I opened them when I missed him too much, she said. Left the others closed when I couldn't stand the sound of his name in my head. I let the silence settle. Then I said, You stole him from me. She flinched, not visibly, just in the eyes. I know, she said. I didn't ask for an apology. I knew she wasn't built to give one. But something about the way she sat, hands in her lap, eyes on a letter she never answered, that was the closest she'd ever come. "You still think I'm like him?" I asked. She looked at me then, full on. Not in anger, not in pity. "No," she said. "He wanted to be seen. You don't need that." I didn't know if it was meant as a compliment or a curse. I stood, closed the drawer. She didn't stop me when I took the letters, didn't ask where I was going. When I walked out the hallway, light flickered once, then died with a faint pop. The bulb finally gave out. I didn't replace it. Some silences don't need filling. I waited until I was sure she was awake before I knocked. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to see her in bed undone. That wasn't how I'd learned to look at her, and despite everything, I wasn't ready to see her soft. She called from the kitchen. "It's open." She always left the door unlocked now, a small shift in her armor. Age makes the fortress less necessary, I guess. She was at the stove flipping eggs. The smell filled the room like memory. I used to sit at the corner of the kitchen and count how many bites it took her to finish breakfast. I don't know why I remembered that. "I brought the photo," I said. She didn't turn around. "Which one?" "The one where you're smiling." That stopped her hand mid-flip. "I don't need to see it," she said. But her voice wasn't cruel, just small. I laid it on the table anyway, right where she could see it if she wanted to. She didn't sit, just leaned against the counter and stared at the wall behind me like it had something better to offer than my face. "I need to ask you something," I said. She didn't nod, didn't answer, but she stayed. That was enough. "Why did you name me Claire?" She blinked. "I don't remember. I don't believe you." She exhaled through her nose. It was the only name that didn't sound like anyone else. Anyone else or like him. She looked down. "Was it a name you picked together?" I asked. She closed her eyes. Just for a second. We talked about names. Not seriously. Just once. What did he want? He liked Elise. I looked at her. "So you gave me both." She didn't respond. That was the first time I saw it, that she hadn't erased him completely. Just buried him beneath layers of control. Layers that at the time felt necessary. I opened the rest of the letters, I said. She didn't ask what they said. Maybe she already knew. They weren't angry, just waiting. She shifted her weight. Her hands gripped the counter behind her like she needed the pressure to stay upright. "You could have let him in." I didn't know how she said. By the time I thought about it, it had been too long. And I'd made you believe something else. You made yourself believe it. She turned her head, not to argue, just to hide. I let the silence stretch. But not too far. "I met him again," I said. Told him the truth, showed him the photo. Her jaw tightened. "He didn't ask why you left. He just said he was glad I came." She swallowed hard. "Then, did he look happy?" "Peaceful." She nodded once, and that word peaceful seemed to settle into her like a stone dropped in still water. I reached into my bag and pulled out the locket, set it beside the plate of eggs she'd forgotten. She stared at it. Not like before. Not like it burned. "Do you want to keep it?" I asked. She shook her head. "I never wore it. I know. I kept it because I didn't know what else to do with it. That's not a reason." "No," she said. "But it's the truth." I didn't press her. She finally sat slow and careful, looked at me like someone realizing the person across the table isn't a stranger, just someone they'd refused to look at for a long time. "I never wanted to be my mother," she said. She was cold, unbending, thought silence was love, and you didn't break the pattern. No, she whispered. I didn't. That landed harder than I expected. Not because I wanted her to be different, because she knew it too. I'm not asking for anything, I said. Not an apology, not love, just honesty. She looked up. You already have that. We sat there in the quiet, a more honest quiet than I ever thought possible between us. Then she said, There's another room. I frowned. What? She stood, motioned for me to follow. Down the hall, past the dead light bulb, past the drawer. She opened the linen closet and pulled at the back panel. It popped forward. Behind it, a crawl space. Inside a box. I reached for it, pulled it into the hallway. She said I couldn't burn those. Inside were more photos. Of him. Of her. Of the three of us, one I'd never seen. She was holding me. He had his arm around her shoulders. We looked like a family, not perfect, but real. She said nothing else. Just stood there. I looked up. You hid a whole life, I said. Her face didn't change, but her voice when it came cracked wide open. Because I didn't know how to hold it. I closed the box, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed her to carry anything. I'd carried it long enough. Back on base, everything moved in rhythm again. Formations, salutes, orders. There was comfort in it. No decisions to make, just a long, disciplined loop of purpose. It helped quiet the noise in my head, the questions I didn't know how to ask anymore. The ones that didn't come with answers anyway. People always said I was calm under pressure, that I didn't crack. They didn't know it was because I'd lived inside pressure for so long, I didn't even feel it anymore. In uniform, I didn't have to be Claire, daughter of Jeannie, the woman with silence in her mouth and fire in her eyes. I could just be Doran, even if the name wasn't true. Or maybe it was, in its own way. A name doesn't stop being yours just because it was handed to you by a lie. You can carry it like a wound or like a shield. I hadn't decided which it was yet. One morning in the mess hall, a junior officer bumped my tray hard enough to spill coffee across my lap. He looked at me, barely mumbled sorry, and kept walking. The table went quiet. Someone muttered, Jesus, and everyone waited. They expected me to lash out. I usually didn't take things like that quietly, but I just stood, wiped the coffee off, and nodded. It's all right, I said. It wasn't. But it didn't matter. Not in the way it used to. Because I was tired of shouting just to prove I existed. The young guy stopped, turned, said, Ma'am, I looked him in the eye. You owe someone else an apology, not me. His face reddened. He nodded and left. I sat down at a new table and ate what was left of my breakfast cold. No one said anything, but I could feel it. Respect. Not loud, not performative, just there in the space between glances. Later that week, I found a letter in my locker. Unmarked. No return address. Inside was a small envelope with no message. Just one item inside the original copy of my birth certificate. The line for father's name had been corrected. Typed clean, Mitchell Wynne. There was no signature, but I knew who had sent it. She'd kept it hidden all this time, burned the first version, kept the second sealed in some drawer or file, and now she'd given it back. I ran my thumb along the edge, folded it neatly, and slid it into my locker beside my pin and the locket. I didn't cry. There wasn't anything left to mourn. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore, or even understanding. It was about weight, the kind you carry and eventually learn how to balance, not drop. I still visited her sometimes. She never talked much, but she started listening more. She would sit in the recliner, feet tucked under her like a girl much younger, and let me speak without flinching. That was new. One night I told her about the junior officer, about how I didn't shout. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then without looking at me, she said, You're not like me. I didn't answer. because I wasn't sure I believed it yet. But that night, I slept with the window cracked open. The air was cool, clean, and when I dreamed, I didn't dream of the hallway. I dreamed of open fields, sunlight, a man with a crooked smile calling my name without fear in his voice. And I woke up feeling nothing heavy, just quiet. It came in a brown envelope with my last name printed in block letters, no ceremony attached. That's how it usually goes, recognition without spotlight, at least when it's real. I opened it at my desk alone. The metal rested in the center of a blue velvet case. I stared at it for a long time, let the shine of it catch in the low light, but didn't touch it. Commendation for field leadership. A rescue operation. 2 injured. No casualties. It wasn't the kind of metal that makes headlines, but it was the kind that people inside the room remembered. The kind that said, "You didn't crack." The citation letter was short, precise. They always are. What it didn't say, what they never say, was what it feels like to be the one everyone turns to when the noise starts. To be calm, not because you're brave, but because chaos is quieter than home. I placed the medal in my locker beside the locket and the folded birth certificate. It looked strange there, clean and gleaming beside 2 things that had been hidden for decades. One meant for display, the other's not. But somehow they all belonged. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not at first. The next weekend, I drove out to Mitchell's house, brought a thermos of coffee and 2 gas station sandwiches. We sat on the porch while his dog barked at dust and shadows. I told him about the mission, the medal. He smiled slow. Proud, but not in the way people perform it. Just satisfied. "She ever give you a hard time about your uniform?" he asked. I nodded. "Still does." He laughed. "She hated the sight of mine. Said the creases were lies." I looked out at the trees swaying. "She sent me my birth certificate," I said. He turned to me. "The real one," I nodded. Something passed between us, soft, steady. Not joy, not relief, just recognition. I didn't ask what he felt. I didn't need to. Before I left, he handed me a box. Small, worn wood. Inside was a photo I hadn't seen. The same moment as the locket photo, but pulled back. You could see the porch behind them, his hand on her knee. My head nestled into her chest. He said, "That's the only time I saw her cry." I swallowed. "When the day you were born." She held you like she was holding her own breath. I didn't know what to say to that, so I took the photo and left. That night, I went to her house. She didn't ask why I came. She never does. We sat at the table, her tea, my silence. I slid the medal across to her. Said nothing. She looked down at it. Didn't touch it. "I didn't raise you to be a hero," she said. "I know," I replied. "You didn't raise me to be anything." That made her blink. Once. Hard. Then she looked at the medal again, and for a moment her mouth opened like she might say something. But she didn't. Instead, she stood, walked to the hallway. I heard her open the drawer. The same drawer. She came back with something wrapped in a napkin, placed it in front of me. I unwrapped it slowly. It was a patch from her old service uniform. Logistics Corps. Faded, torn at the edge. "You can keep that," she said. "Didn't mean much to me. Maybe it will to you." I folded it gently, pressed it into my coat pocket. We didn't talk after that, but when I stood to leave, she said, "Claire." I turned. "You didn't fail," she said. That was all. And it didn't land like an apology. It landed like someone trying to offer a plank after the shipwreck. Not to rebuild, just so we wouldn't drown standing next to each other. I walked out into the night air. The sky was clear. Stars above the roofline. In my car, I looked at the patch. It smelled faintly of dust and something I couldn't name. I placed it with the others. One more artifact in the story I was still learning how to carry. The nurse called early just after 6. I knew before I picked up. There's a rhythm to certain rings, like the difference between footsteps that arrive and footsteps that leave. She had a fall, the nurse said. Minor, but we recommend keeping her here for observation. I drove over in silence. That was the default setting now, not numb, not angry. Just stripped of any need to narrate it to myself. I knew what it meant when a fall turned into observation. I knew what it meant when the woman who never let anyone near her body suddenly let strangers lift her in and out of bed. She was awake when I arrived, sitting up, arms crossed, trying to pretend she didn't need help sipping water. You drove all this way for nothing, she said. I sat in the chair beside her bed. She didn't look at me. I had the time I said. The room was quiet, white walls, white sheets. Her gown barely tied at the back, but she still tried to sit straight. Her hair, once so precise, had thinned out in patches. She turned her head slowly. You still wear that thing? I reached up, touched the locket beneath my collar. I do. She snorted. Ugly little thing. I smiled. Yeah, but it's mine now. We didn't talk for a while. Just sat. The IV bag hissed gently, and the hallway outside buzzed with soft sounds. Footsteps, carts rolling, someone coughing in another room. Eventually she said, They say I'm dehydrated, like I don't know how to drink water. You don't. She gave a tired laugh, then closed her eyes. I could have left, but I didn't. I stayed because at this point I knew there wasn't a final scene coming. No deathbed confessional, no poetic reversal. She was who she'd always been. And the thing is, I didn't need her to change anymore. I used to lie awake at night when I was younger, imagining what it would sound like to hear her say she was sorry. I'd go over it in my head, what her voice might sound like soft, what her arms might feel like if they held instead of hit. But she never said it. And now, watching her blink slowly under the fluorescent light, I realized something I didn't expect. I didn't want it anymore. Not the apology, not the closure, just the truth. I stood and walked to the window. The sky was cloudy. A single sliver of light peeked through, angled across the tile floor, like a doorway that would never quite open. She'll be fine, the nurse said as she passed behind me. But she might need help at home. I nodded. She always has. When I turned back, Jeannie was asleep. Her face looked smaller with her mouth slightly open, her chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths. I sat back down, reached into my coat, pulled out the patch, the one she gave me. I unfolded it, smoothed it across my knee, ran my thumb along the edges. It had held up better than she had. I placed it beside her on the nightstand, set it next to her dentures and a folded tissue she'd been crumpling in her palm. A soldier's insignia, a memory she didn't keep for herself. I didn't say goodbye, just stood and walked out. The hall light flickered above the elevator, and for a second I stopped. Not because of the flicker, but because I didn't feel anything. Not dread, not sorrow, not relief. Just clarity. She never said sorry, and I no longer needed her to. I stepped into the elevator and let the doors close quietly. The legal change took less than 20 minutes. I signed a few papers, showed my ID, looked the clerk in the eye when she asked me if I was sure. I said yes. The name went through, just like that. Claire Wynne Doran. I kept both. One for the man who never left even when he was erased, and one for the story I survived even if it was built on silence. It wasn't about honoring them. Not really. It was about anchoring myself to the truth. Holding two pieces of a past that had split me down the middle and stitching them together in a name that didn't flinch. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not Mitchell, not Jeannie, not the people I served with. The name felt like something I needed to try on in private. See how it moved, how it held weight. On the first morning with the new name, I walked past a mirror and said it out loud. Just once. Claire Wynne Doran. It sounded real. It sounded mine. Later that week, I visited the museum near the academy. Small, quiet, walls lined with personal items, dog tags, letters, medals that never made it into the spotlight. I walked up to the desk and handed over a sealed envelope and a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside the broken locket, the original photograph. A letter I'd written explaining everything, not in detail, just enough. This belonged to 2 soldiers, I wrote, one who stayed, one who ran, and a daughter who stood between them, not knowing why. The curator nodded when she read it. Said they'd keep it in the private archive for now. Maybe one day display it. Maybe one day someone would read it and understand that silence doesn't mean absence. It just means someone chose not to speak. Outside, the sun was setting. The light dipped across the pavement in long, golden lines. I stood on the museum steps for a long time, letting the warmth sink in. I didn't call her again. Not Jeannie. I sent a card. Simple. No message inside. She'd understand. Or not. It didn't matter. Mitchell called me that weekend. Said he'd fixed up the porch swing. Said he could finally sit without it squeaking. You should see it, he said. I will, I told him. Not a promise, just a truth in motion. That Sunday, I changed the bulb in my hallway. Not because it flickered, but because I could. No more signs, no more warnings. Just light, steady, clear. The next morning, I put on my uniform, checked every fold, smoothed the cuffs, looked in the mirror and saw her Claire Wynne Doran. Not someone's shadow, not someone's secret. Just a name I chose to carry. The quiet wasn't gone, but it belonged to me now.